Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. Is the Champions Classic, and if it's time to think about maybe shaking it up just a little bit, okay? And that's because if you watch the games, two things stood out. Kentucky Duke was everything great about college basketball. Two huge brands, filled arena, it's loud, people are into it, two exciting young coaches. By the way, Kentucky, super well coached. We can all see it with our eyes. Duke with those NBA players, Cooper. Oh, it felt so good, baby. Then we had the first game. Well, very good. Kansas beat Michigan State. I'll be real. Kansas had a great game from Hunter Dickinson. Kansas, I think, is pretty good. They're not even playing that well right now. Michigan State, I don't really remember a single thing that they did that had me like excited about them as a team and like as a team that I want to watch. Like Kansas didn't look great, but you can see the pieces are there. They're really exciting. And you watch Michigan State and you just say, I don't really know if they're all that exciting. And so I bring it up because as the games were unfolding, an interesting little narrative popped up on social media that I think is worth diving into here. And that narrative is pretty straightforward. Is it time to boot Michigan State from the Champions Classic? And as specifically, is it also time to maybe bring in UConn to replace him? Thought it was interesting. You know, a guy that I've criticized a lot through the years, put out a pretty interesting column on Wednesday morning. Dan Wolkin, USA Today. Didn't agree with a lot of his COVID takes, but that's another conversation from 5 years ago that we don't have to get into. But he put out a column. This is his tweet. He said, column from last night. If college basketball is going to have an event called the Champions Classic, it might be a good idea to have teams that actually win championships. Time to boot Michigan State for UConn. I'll also add, I think Dan Wetzel, I don't know if he wrote a column, but Dan Wetzel, I remember seeing this on Tuesday night. He did have a tweet. It says, how many more national titles does UConn have to win to get into the Champions Classic? Question mark, question mark. And so it's an interesting conversation. It's the end of the week. And I'm here to say something very simple. On this show, and I've said this before, I always like to say, we talk about several different types of stories. We talk about what did happen, what will happen, what could happen, and what should happen even if it won't. And let's go ahead and put the Torres stamp of approval on booting Michigan State from the Champions Classic and replacing them with UConn. By the way, I also saw John Rothstein put out an argument for adding a third game to that. We'll get to that in a minute. But let me just explain baseline why I actually agree with the sentiment that UConn should be in this event. And it's not because, Torres is a UConn guy. Here's the bottom line. To me, listen, I love college hoops, right? I think if you're watching this channel, if you're watching this show, if you're watching this clip, if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, you love college basketball too. But I'll say this, even as a college basketball fan, the season kind of creeps up on you. You don't really know oh my goodness, it's here. We're playing exhibitions. We're playing games. And the Champions Classic has always been the unofficial launch of college basketball season. It used to actually be the season opening day. They have changed that. But I bring it up because college basketball, it's so easy to get lost in the weeds. Has it started? Is this an exhibition? Does it count? Whatever. And so the Champions Classic has now become the unofficial launch of the college basketball season. And so when I think about putting college basketball's best foot forward, what stands out, Michigan State ain't it, right? Like you go back and you look, first of all, Michigan State hasn't even been good in this event. I went back and looked it up. Their last 9 games in this event, Michigan State is 2-7. One of the wins was during COVID when there was no crowds. So I don't even count that. Played in an empty arena, whatever. And then, oh, by the way, the other one was against one of Calipari's worst teams at Kentucky a few years ago. So it's not like they're even playing well in the event. But to me, what it really comes down to, this is supposed to be a signature moment in college basketball's kind of unofficial launch party, right? The moment where we put our best foot forward as a sport and we say, look, we know you love the NFL. We know you love your college football program, but don't forget that we started and we got a pretty darn good product too. And I think to the credit of Kansas, they have lived up to that end of the bargain. Duke, we talked about it on Tuesday night show. They ended up losing. That is a good basketball team. They always have NBA dudes. They're a fun watch. I'm sorry if I'm saying too many nice things about Duke, but it's true. Kentucky, we know what's happened there, but what I also know is Mark Pope's the right guy. They're going to play a fun brand. They're going to have NBA players as we go forward. They're going to always be there. Michigan State's kind of the outlier. And so to me, if we are putting our best foot forward in college basketball, let's put our best brands and let's put our best programs. And there is no doubt in my mind that UConn is that right now. They're not only the two-time defending champ, they're dominating. They have NBA players. I mean, Donovan Clingan, by the way, went for 17, 13, and 8 the other night against the Portland Trail Blazers, okay? So UConn's got NBA players. They play a fun style. They're part of the college basketball discourse all season long. And not just when they win national championships. Like, whether UConn three-peats or not, they are a story. They do matter. They are a brand that people care about. I'd say this. Dan Hurley right now, I guess Calipari is still maybe the face of college basketball if you think about it. But Dan Hurley's kind of like the guy right now, right? Like Dan Hurley goes on Pat McAfee's show all the time. I'm sorry, but with due respect to John Shire or whoever, Dan Hurley's the only guy that's on Pat McAfee. He's really the only college basketball coach that's on with Colin Cowherd. I mean, he is the front-facing person in this sport right now as John Calipari gets older, as Mark Few gets older, as Jay Wright retires, as Coach K retires, whatever. And so to me, if we're putting college basketball's best foot forward, if we care about this sport and we care about getting people interested, put the best teams with the best players and the biggest brands, and I'm sorry, Michigan State ain't it. Now, a couple other quick thoughts. One, like I said, we talk about what should happen, even if it won't. I understand. They just announced an extension of the Champions Classic. It is going to run through 2028, meaning these 4 teams are going to be in this event here for the next 4 years at minimum. So I get that it's not going anywhere. I mentioned earlier, I saw John Rothstein put out the argument, add a third game. Very rarely do I disagree with John Rothstein on college. I don't think a third game in one night is the answer. The event started at 6:30. It was tough for people to even get to the arena. As you saw, it was a completely empty arena. Now what are we going to do? Start at 2 p.m.? I don't buy it. By the way, the last game ended at like 11:30, 12 o'clock Eastern time. Again, we want people watching our sport, consuming our sport, etc. And so to me, the answer is just boot Michigan State, add UConn, or how about this? I thought about this. For you old school college basketball fans, do you remember an event called the DirecTV Grade 8 Festival? I might be the only person in America that remembers it, okay? When I was a kid, what they would do is they would put together a 2-night event where the previous year's Elite 8 would get together, right? So if it was UConn, Duke, Kentucky, Alabama, whoever, it doesn't really matter. And it was basically essentially the 8 best teams from the year before playing to essentially open the season. If we're going to add one game, let's just add 2, because that Tuesday, Wednesday window, it's a little bit quieter in the sports world. I think ESPN, I guess, technically has the NBA contract, whatever. I'd rather add 2 games and make the Champions Classic a 2-night event than a 1-night event. Maybe that's not possible. I don't really know. Whatever. It's just a thought, but I'll say this. Michigan State's getting tougher and tougher to watch. They look like a boring Big Ten school. They haven't even been competitive in that league. We talked about it on, I guess it was Tuesday night after the 2 games, where it's like Michigan State has finished in the top 4 once in the last 4 years in the Big Ten, made one Sweet 16. They're not very good. Anyway, there's other college hoop stuff to talk about. So we'll close by saying this. Yeah, I do think that it's time to boot Michigan State and put UConn in the Champions Classic.